Diane, and she helped to get on this television. It was during World War II, and my father was a merchant marine, and his brother went into the Navy. And then on mother's side, she had two brothers that were in the Navy and one in the Army. Well, Mother and I were staying with them because we didn't have a house. You know, during World War II, you couldn't build no houses because everything was going to the war. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I would say that the house that my grandparents lived in was at least 100 feet or more away from the road. And all the rural roads were dirt, no paved roads. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, it was pouring down snow this particular night. This is probably my very earliest memory as a child in that house. And so my uncle and grandfather wondered why, they all wondered why in the world is somebody out in this snowstorm. And so my uncle and grandfather went out there, and this Afro-American man was taking his wife in that wagon with pulled by a horse to Lincoln Hospital, which would have been, I would say, 6 to 8 miles from that house. And so anyway, my uncle he was poor. He came from the mountains, Canton, and got a job at the American Tobacco Company. So he had it was either a Plymouth or Dodge. But I remember them lifting her out of that wagon and putting her in the back seat of his car, and he took her to Lincoln Hospital. Oh, wow. And so, you know, everybody helped everybody because there was no telephones, no ambulances, no EMS. Can you imagine living like that? Well, the way it worked, everybody helped each other. Mm-hmm. And then one lady that was one door down from them, she lived in a log cabin, and she sold eggs and milk and buttermilk, all those kind of things. And so everybody in the neighborhood bought from her, and that helped her to live. Mm-hmm. And it was just, and most families just had one car, and whoever had the car, if somebody didn't have one, then they rode with the people that had the car. So, you know, we made do with the circumstances that we were in. And then when that changed, it was at the end of the 40s, because that's when people started getting refrigerators. I have a set of, it's not a set of china, but it's bowls, and it's got on there where when Mr. and Ms. Long bought their first refrigerator, how what was it? Montgomery Aldridge gave them these dishes, and I still got them. So anyway,
that's amazing.
So anyway, this is what got me to thinking about how some people, these college students that are griping about having to pay their own way, hey, they should be glad that they had a college education, because that wasn't even available to women when I was coming along. Mm-hmm. You were either a secretary, a nurse, or a teacher, and unless you came from a wealthy family, and nobody was wealthy. Back in Durham, it was the dukes and people that had businesses, and that was it.
Wow. Oh my gosh, this is awesome. This would have been like their formal.
No, the formal is over there. This is the informal.
I see.
And Dr. Mann will be by here, and he will fix your glasses. In the United States, North Carolina was number 1 in raising flue-cured tobacco. And then then the Attorney General says smoking's bad for your health. That killed North Carolina, and Sam Erwin and Everett Jordan were our senators, so they knew they had to do something. So anyway, they built the Research Triangle, because in Durham, especially in Durham, the middle class working people, a lot of people worked at the American Tobacco Company and Liggett Myers. I knew a lot of people. In fact, the nurse that I worked with the first year I started working, she quit nursing and went over to Liggett Myers to work because they paid more money. Back then, salaries were awful. People would starve to death on the salaries that people made.
Interesting. I didn't know that's how RTP was started.
Mm-hmm. So anyway,
my in-laws were tobacco farmers, and before my husband was born, they were tobacco farmers, and back about an hour from Durham in Samora, and my father-in-law retired from Lorillard or whatever tobacco.
No way.
Yeah. Well, they had very good benefits. My mother worked on Herbert Tarleton's side, and my uncle worked on Lucky Strike's side. And then I had a friend that worked at Liggett Myers, this family that I met up with and as a teenager. But anyway, once that was determined, then things started changing. Of course, I'm sure agriculture tried to encourage people to raise different crops, because down at Lillington, you'll find cotton. They still raise tobacco around, but not like they did. And I asked somebody the average amount of tobacco that they raised, and it was somewhere around 12 acres. And school started in September so that the children could help their parents get it all together so that they could take it to market.
Right.
Now, Apex had the first market in Wake County, and it was up here where Hunter Street is on the corner with North Salem, and Peggy Rigsby. I know her. It was either her grandfather or her father. I know her father was a tobacconist, and he went up to Durham too. But anyway, I'm not sure which one actually built it. I have a feeling it may have been her grandfather. I got to clarify that with her. She's still living, and a real special friend. But anyway, and then they built the railroad here, and they took the tobacco from here to Durham. And so it was very profitable at that time. If they had a good year, tobacco farmers did very well. If they had a bad year,
it explains the way the railroad runs too through the state, because it kind of goes through those
tobacco areas.
Yeah.
So anyway, and then Irwin Mill was the cotton, and their working conditions didn't compare, as I understand it, with the tobacco factories. They didn't have heat and air conditioning in the buildings. One of my neighbors worked there, and I'll tell you something else. Little boys, I found this out interviewing people and just living here. When little boys, this was in the early 1900s, when little boys got to about the 4th grade, they had to stop work and go to work to help support their families. And my grandfather, my father's father, he lived in Moore County, so he went to work in a lumber yard and learned all about lumber, and that's how he was able to get the lumber for our house to be built right at the end of World War II. I bet you he found a building that he could get cheap or something like that, but he was a wheeler and dealer anyhow, and he had a barbershop in Bragtown. But anyway, he was a real good man, and always took care of his family. That was one of the things, people that were good people, they always helped to take care of other people. But anyway, that's what I understand about tobacco. And then, of course, I always heard, well, Apex isn't growing, but it will when the children die off, when the parents die off. Well, sure enough, that's what happened. And so they had Jordan Lake got built so that it could supply the water to Cary and to Apex. And we had it from the lake over there that's off of 64. But anyway, that is, people walk around it now, and I don't know if they still use the water, but anyway, they got the water so that all this housing, when they said the Research Triangle was going out there, Cary said, well, we'll furnish the housing. And that's how it got to be bigger than Apex, because when I came here in 63, Apex, Cary, Fuquay, Zebulon, and Wake Forest, we were all the same size. And when the Wake Med was built, it would have never been built if it had not been for the people in the county voting to have little hospitals like we had in all the communities. All of them were 20 beds and basically offered the same services, and it's where the doctors were. Dewey Powell was on the board of directors for Wake Med, and then Jennings Booth was on the county commissioners. So I feel like that, this is an assumption on mine, but that's how we got the
I
hospital.
always wondered how we were able
When
to.
Duke developed their eye center, he sent all of his patients up there, and it all worked out good because they have not just United States prominent eye doctors, they are world renowned
Yeah.
doctors, and I took my brother-in-law up there and they fixed his problem. And so anyway, anybody that tells me they having unsuccessful luck with getting their eyes fixed, I said, well, you get an appointment at Duke and they'll fix it. These are clothes that,
Yeah, wow.
I can't remember the lady's name, but there's one lady that has given us a lot of clothing. And Laura and I were gonna fix this bed, and they sent it to me. But anyway, and then the launches, they gave this baby. They got, soldiers, World War II uniforms in the top. Wow. And children, and so he told, I hadn't heard anything about a Christmas tour or anything this year, so we'll see what happens. Well,
Finally, when we moved here.
well, I tell you, Pete Mashler died. Did you know that? And then Connie, she's in good shape.
Oh my gosh, so many stories.
And then they have a store where the Rusty Bucket was, right in there somewhere. And then one across the street, I think, when I moved here.
So this would have been,
Dr. Pearson took his practice, and then that's Dr. Goodwin over to the